Hello, and welcome to my Vestaria Saga low turn count playthrough. We are playing through the game on Clemency mode rather than Orthodox mode, which I will explain why that matters to you later. So, the first chapter of Vestaria Saga is extremely boring. It's mainly about full moving everyone possible until you can reach the escape point. Our team currently consists of a healer, a typical sword lord, an overpowered cav, and 2 worthless armor knights. Even though Athol, the staffer, is normally pretty unremarkable, she is a staff bot and does nothing else. In this playthrough, she's actually incredibly powerful because we are playing on Clemency mode, and Clemency mode does 2 things for us. It increases experience gains by 20%, and it gives Athol a skill, which means that whenever she is deployed, everyone deployed gains +2 attack and defense, which helps a lot at certain points throughout the game. The best analogy for my decision to do this playthrough on Clemency mode rather than Orthodox mode is that it's a lot like people who play Paragon mode instead of normal mode in Thracia's 776 low turn count playthroughs, which is that it doesn't fundamentally change the strategies. You're going to have the same turn count in the end, regardless of which mode you play, but it just makes things a lot easier and less rigging intensive for the person who is doing the playthrough. Another condition that I'm playing through the game with is full recruitment and full survival. And while personally I prefer to do low turn count playthroughs where you let people die and don't necessarily recruit everyone, this singular chapter is, I think, about 90% of the reason why I'm doing full recruitment and full survival, which is that unlike other Kaga games with escape objectives where, for instance, you could have Zaid or Athol escape and everyone else is left behind. In this game, most escape maps are escape all, and this one is no exception. And I said that Bonacel and Prody, the 2 hunks of metal, were completely useless, and while that's true, they also have very good defensive parameters. And it would just be, and in order to get the best turn count on this map, I would need to get both of them killed in the prologue, because they are the 2 limiting factors on how quickly we can escape everyone, and their chances of dying are just astronomically low, especially when playing on Clemency mode, so it's better to just not bother with that. I think I would have to rig critical hits from the rogues with knives on them, and that's just not something I want to do. I didn't talk much about this chapter because there's really not much going on. I'm just trying to visit as many houses as I can, but most of them don't matter because they only give you about 100 denarii. The only places that really matter to visit are the bottom left house, which gives us our first cutlass, and there's also a thief who we want to kill because he drops a jeweled knife that sells for a decent amount. So that's the prologue completed in 9 turns. There isn't much to say about it. And now we are moving on to chapter 1, which is marginally more interesting than prologue. Thing is, there are quite a few things going on in the early maps of Vestaria Saga, but especially when one is first playing through the game casually, but in terms of a low turn count playthrough, they really aren't that intricate. It's mainly you full move Zaid wherever he needs to go, and while doing that, you have other people complete side objectives. So the objective of the map is to seize the manor in the bottom left of the map. Unfortunately, we can't immediately do that because there are a lot of bandits attacking a village to the north, and the village to the north is guarded by 3 green units currently, and though they're footlocked, which would spell death for them in a lot of other games, they're actually quite good. We have Dune the Archer, and Ash and Sean the fighters, and we're going to soon be joined by another underage staff girl, which is a Kaga classic. So currently Troy is running towards a village in the top left of the map, and also helping clear the way for Zaid so that he doesn't get blocked and cost us a turn. Though actually, it looks like what I just did with Zaid was pretty suboptimal and might cost a turn because he moved far less than his full move. Even if you completely clear the path for Zaid and he moves maximum distance every turn, he's still going to come up one space short of the village gate that he needs to visit, so it's not actually a big deal to do this. You don't lose turns. Protea and Bonicel are dealing with the bands in the middle. There's a sword fighter called Amundsen who's just playing around with sand, and he eventually attacks us, so we throw a few Pilia at him. Anyways, Protea and Bonicel are too slow to do anything to help us in the top of the map, but there's actually quite a bit to be done in the bottom left. There are a lot of enemies that need to be cleared out, and there's actually a decent amount of unreliability in this map, and it's almost entirely because of one unit who's about to show up. He is the canonical edgy sword man, and he edgily kills two of the bandits who he supposedly allied with. Here you're going to first see the first incident of the 5-turn save feature in Vestaria Saga, which is that at the beginning of every 5th turn you can save, which is pretty necessary to make playing this game reasonable, just because there are a lot of really long maps in this game. And from a perspective of a low turn count playthrough, it's extremely useful because it allows us to rig unreliable enemy phases or boss kills as long as they coincide with turns that are divisible by turn numbers divisible by 5. However, we aren't going to spend a huge amount of time using... Well, you won't see this because it's all edited afterwards, but I don't spend a huge amount of time using map saves to rig good level ups. The fact of the matter is that you don't need exceptional stats to do most things in Vestaria Saga. Base stats are low. Base stats are far more important than growths because growths are so low in this game, and stat benchmarks you need aren't particularly high, especially when it comes to strength, because the cutlass, which is one of the weapons that Troy had that we got in a village in the prologue, is a brave weapon that becomes frequently viable, and when you have 4 attacks a round of combat, you really don't need the highest strength. But there are a few circumstances where we do need to rig stats, though generally it doesn't matter too much as long as people stay somewhat near their averages. There are a few times in the game where we have to hit extremely strict benchmarks. So now that everything's been visited, we are converging on the southern section of the map. Dune is going to quickly run up the cliff to kill the bandit sitting at the center of a bunch of rivers because he drops a coin pouch. So dealing with Halden, the edgy swordmaster, is a little tricky because he's blocking our way in, and he has very high evade, and is actually pretty strong. He's not capable of hurting Bonicel really, but he can deal a lot of damage. He has pretty good crit rate, can string together a bunch of attacks, and Bonicel has slightly under 50% chance of hitting him. So, well, quite a bit less, in fact. So there's a decent amount of unreliability here. You just kind of have to park Bonicel in front of him and hope he lands enough hits. Ideally, Bonicel would proc his critical reprisal skill to take Halden out in one hit, but that unfortunately doesn't happen playthrough. So even though this strategy is generally pretty reliable otherwise, it can be a bit suspect at this point, and I did have to reset a few times. So here you can see Halden healing, and I was actually, all things considered, exceptionally sloppy in this part. I did not maximize reliability in terms of taking out Halden. For example, Zaid has a skill which would boost Bonicel's hit, but I didn't take advantage of that by moving Zaid forward before attacking with Bonicel, and it's going to be even more gross on the next turn, believe you me. So Dune is just going to hang around and try and get a few kills on those bandits. We want to get Dune a decent number of kills because he's going to be our first promotion, and it might seem a bit counterintuitive why you would early promote an archer, because archers are terrible in most Saga or Fire Emblem games, but you'll see when we get to that point why Dune has to be our first promotion. So once again, even though stats aren't essential, it's nice to get some kills on him so that he's slightly stronger. And here, all that's left is to take down the boss. He has a Francisco, which is a throwing axe with 3 range, but thankfully with the cutlass and some other things, it's actually pretty easy to take him down. Insofar as possible, we like to also feed kills to Ashe, just because Ashe is much better than Jean, even though they seem pretty indistinguishable at first. This is because at level 8, Ashe gets a skill which gives him an extra point of move, and as all series veterans know, move is the best stat. So in another sign of the sloppiness, we're not going to get all the items here from the villages. It's really not that important. Money matters in this game, but we don't have to obsess about every last bit of gold. But if I were not lazy and willing to re-record from turn 5 onwards, we could have got that as well. It's my problem. So we seize, and that's chapter 1 completed in 11 turns. And now we move on to chapter 2. So in the middle of the map, standing on a fortress, is Merida, the green cavalier, and she's the best unit in the game, I would contend. There's some debate about whether it's her or Troy. Merida has the advantage of having 9 move rather than 8, but she has slightly worse availability and worse bulk, but on the other hand, she also doesn't have a double and triple threat like Troy does, but on the other hand, she has a really strong personal weapon and access to magical female-only weapons, so there's some debate back and forth. I think she's the best unit in the game, and she's definitely the best in the context of a low turn count playthrough, because there are some things that only she can do with her 9 move that Troy, even with his 8 move, cannot do. So Merida does have a small chance of death to begin with at the start of this map, but it's not a huge deal. I think it's somewhere between 10 and 20%, so it rarely happens. If it does, Merida comes back much later in the game in a different class and with 10 move rather than 9, but there are things Merida has to do to save us turns before she comes back later on. So this map is split into 2 objectives. First, you have to seize the bottom right fort where a pirate is standing, then you have to go all the way to the top left to seize another fort. So first we obviously have to walk down and seize the first one. Here Zaid uses Edelstern, his personal weapon, which I haven't mentioned yet, to attack the thief. Edelstern is a brave weapon with extremely high hit and effectiveness against armors. Due to its really high hit, it's quite good for taking out pesky thieves like Zaid just did, because they often have ridiculously high speed and as such evade, but the Edelstern just has such good hit that it doesn't matter. And Troy has a small chance of death here because he has to deal with a battle axe bandit who 2-shots him. Unfortunately, I was a bit sloppy with conserving the uses of the 1 cutlass I had. If I'd used the cutlass, if I had more uses left on the cutlass and I didn't have to save for the boss of chapter 2, he could have cutlassed down the battle axe pirate in 1 round of combat, thereby reducing his chance of death, but it worked out okay anyways. And now that Merida is safe, everyone else can run over. So Merida, you can talk to her with Zaid to recruit her during this chapter, but that costs turns, and I don't need Merida until in this chapter, so I'm just going to leave her there. She automatically joins after this chapter anyways. So Troy is going to take down the current boss, the boss on enemy phase, and now we can redirect our attention towards the top left of the map. As soon as Zaid seizes the place where the former boss was standing, a huge number of pirates are going to spawn. And while pirates aren't that threatening normally, they can walk on water, which makes it hard to set up effective choke points against them. And another issue is that water gives plus 25 evade, and this early in the game, a lot of our units simply don't have the best hit yet, so there are a lot of shaky hit rates in the next section, which is why it's very good for us that we have a 5-turn save. So yeah, as you can see, a bunch of them shot out. Now, it might be difficult because of the rough terrain and the lack of offense we have to punch through quickly enough, if it weren't for the fact that Zaid was stuck far away from the action, which gives us a fair bit of time to deal with them. A weapon that, a staff that you get is, and is on Alicia, is the Staff of Beatitude, which gives the Regenesis condition for 5 turns to a unit, which is kind of like having renewal temporarily. And that's quite useful here because Ashe and Dune are going to face a lot of enemies at once, and the hit rates aren't great, so there's a decent chance that they'll just be bruised a little bit, and by slapping Regenesis on them, you don't have to worry about healing them every turn, and you can use this to either have Alicia heal someone else, like Troy, who is still injured despite smoking some herbs, or you can use it on anyone else who needs it. So, once again, what we're doing here with Troy wouldn't be possible if we also needed to be concerned about healing Dune and Ashe. So, because of Ashe's starting position, he kind of takes the front here, and he can also use a Hurlburt to get more counterattacks in against 1-2 range enemies. The hit rates aren't great, but once again, as long as we slowly bruise them and take them down, it's not such a big deal. One thing about Vestaria Saga, as opposed to other games, is that throwing spears like Pillium and normal spears are different weapon types, and unfortunately, unpromoted cavalry units cannot use throwing weapons. So Troy is locked to 1 range, and it would be nice if we could trade him the Pillium that the Armor Knights have, but unfortunately we can't do that, so he can't use 1-2 range, which would slow us down again, but once again we have a lot of space. And here there are consistently low hit rates, but by doing things like trading around the Pillium, as we did with Bonacel and Prody, we can just increase the odds of punching through on time. So you might wonder why Dune is running in seemingly the other direction. The reason why we're having him do that is that in Vestaria Saga there are lots of tiles which are marked by question mark, which when examined give you items, either stat boosters or healing items. And to the bottom left in that shell on the beach is liquid defense, which gives +1 defense to someone. And we're going to keep that in the convoy for a while. There's someone who, later on, who isn't a typical receiver of stat boosters, but due to how availability is strange in Vestaria Saga, she will have to do a lot of things that she wouldn't in a casual playthrough, so we're not going to use that immediately, which makes Vestaria Saga a bit of a different low turn count game than other ones, because normally if you've got something like a defense booster early, you would immediately slap it on someone who's already tanking and is going to face a huge amount of combat, someone like Troy or Merida, but we have to save it for this one specific use later in the game. But that's alright. So now everyone is pretty bunched up and Zaid is starting to catch up, so we're nearing the point where it's actually quite important that attacks land, but thankfully with the Edelstern, Zaid can help clear as well. The boss also, since we got close, showed up, and you can't see it yet. The boss is insanely bulky. He has about 48 HP. He isn't very strong offensively, but that's a lot of HP to punch through, and it's why we had to save uses on the Cutlass, because without the Cutlass and the large number of attacks it allows Troy to have, we simply wouldn't be able to burst the boss down on time unless I wanted to rig a lot of procs of multi-chance on Troy. Bonacel is going down to visit another house. It doesn't have anything too important in it, but since the Badland terrain, which are what the brown tiles are, inhibits the movement both of cavalry and of armored knights, but not of lighter infantry like the Axe Bros and Zaid. There's no way that Bombcell and Prody could keep up. And here we take out the last pirate, leaving only the boss. And it's up to Troy to deal most of the damage to him, because the Cutlass allows him to land a bunch of attacks at once. So, you'll see here that by proccing Double Chance, Troy gets in an incredible 6 attacks in 1 round of combat, because Multi-Chance, instead of giving an extra attack like Adept might in other Kaga Saga or Fire Emblem games, it actually is multiplicative and multiplies the number of attacks you get. So on his first attack, when Troy procced Multi-Chance, it actually gave him 4 attacks plus the 2 at the beginning. So that's Chapter 2 completed in 11 turns. I will see you next time with Chapter 3, which is much longer and will take an entire video by itself.